Because if the human food supply chain prices are going up, food's getting scarce, it's doing the same thing in the chicken world for the same reasons. Food shortages are something that is a very tangible and real thing for a lot of the world right now. It's being talked about quite a bit. The whole point of homesteading, or one of the big points to homesteading, is to grow your own food, to decentralize, to sort of gain some control, and to ensure supply of food. But how does our livestock and feeding our livestock factor into that? And more specifically, how does the most ubiquitous homestead animal probably in existence, the chicken, fit into this? Competition for food between livestock and humans is not a new concept. There are numerous scientific papers, a lot of opinion piece columns that have been done. It's been in the media, there's been documentaries made about it. It's not new news. And it's not new news because, frankly, there is some truth to it. That being said, the truths get rather gray. And what we're hoping to do in today's video is look at one species in particular, and that's the chicken. You know, the beginner livestock for many homesteaders. But chickens are very complicated. Chickens have a long history of close association with humans. Hence why there's so many kinds of chickens, and hence why chickens have virtually gone everywhere on the planet. But in modern times, the relationship dynamic is different than it used to be. And most chicken that is consumed, at least in Western cultures, is grown in complete confinement. Now, I'm not going to go down that road too far, but keeping chickens in confinement on that scale does compete for land that could be used to grow crops to feed humans directly. Of course, this goes into a whole discussion of, is there still a place for animal products in the human diet? Are we better off being vegetarian, beyond meat? All of this kind of stuff. Well, my own personal opinion is there is a place for animals in a human diet and in human relationships because we have lived that way for thousands of years. But we're going to go through an example here to show potentially where there needs to be some thought given, especially for us who are striving for a more sustainable way of living, to look at how we feed our chickens in particular and how we can actually reduce some of that competition. So we've taken some notes and done some research, and now keep in mind some of this number crunching, as it were, is a little bit vague because some of the parameters are hard to quantify. They're hard to get information on. This is assuming that a chicken basically eats a pelleted diet, so you know what you would buy at the feed store. On average, keeping in mind that depending on the size of the chicken and whatnot, this may vary, but using a layer, so like a dual purpose bird, kind of a standard size chicken, you're looking at roughly 1.75 pounds of pelleted feed per week for that one chicken. So that breaks down to about a half a cup or roughly a quarter of a pound of food per day for that chicken. So if you times that by 365, that one chicken, who may be laying, maybe a pullet, but basically a standard size kind of adult chicken, in 1 year would consume roughly 91.25 pounds of food, which is quite a bit. That being said, compared to a human, that's not very much at our 2,000 pounds for most North Americans per year. That's kind of a drop in the bucket. But that poundage has to come from somewhere. And so if we look at commercial pelleted feeds or readily available pelleted feeds, what those do is provide us convenience, right? They are a whole ration, so to speak, that we can quickly and easily feed to our birds and get relatively standard results from it. It's scientifically proven. As most rations do, that's essentially assuming that that's all you're feeding them. There's even quite a bit of literature suggesting that if you offer too much in the way of other foods, you can actually offset the balance of nutrients and whatnot in these prepared diets, which, again, is 100% true because you are not controlling as much of what's going into that chicken. But if we take this value of the 91.25 pounds, We look into what that's sort of comprised of. Now, chicken foods vary, but we're kind of looking at a rough average of most readily available chicken foods are probably 60% corn and 25% soy, give or take. But you can really insert kind of any grain here. Most prepared chicken diets are going to be grain-based. And a lot of diets that you may find you use yourself on your homestead are still going to be grain-based. But we're going to start with this value. Roughly that pellet is somewhere between 80 and 90% grains, corn and soy in this particular instance. For us, an average feed bag is usually about 40 kilograms, which works out to be about 88 pounds. So if we use that kind of value, per bag, you're looking at approximately 52 pounds of corn and 22 pounds of soy that would have had to go in to make that. And that's not including some lossage because you're making it into pellets and you may have some fines that they're not able to eat. So this is not even considering that side of things. That's one chicken. But if we take and times that by, let's say, a flock of 24 birds, 24 adult chickens that we might have on a homestead, we'd have to times that 24 chickens by the 91.25 pounds for the year, which equals out 2,190 pounds for that flock for a year, which is suddenly substantial considering when we looked at the food that we grew and brought in for ourselves in 2021, we were just over the 3,000 mark. So 2,000 pounds of prepared food going to the chickens, that's a lot. That puts it in some perspective there. And this is where it gets it, and this is where it starts to get even more interesting, because if you continue to just do some simple math, extrapolate that, you're looking at 1,300 pounds of corn and 550 pounds of soy that would have had to go into that 2,190 pounds of chicken feed. Now, of course, that soy and corn has to be grown somewhere because it is a grain crop. And this was another place that varies, but on average, we looked up some average yields for sort of corn, pounds of corn and pounds of soy per acre. For corn, it was 9,270 pounds per acre. And for soy, it was about 3,180. So a little bit less, but obviously soy is a higher protein than corn, generally speaking, although that could be debatable too. If again you kind of reverse engineer this, cumulatively you're looking at just over a quarter acre of arable land to grow the food for your flock of 24 chickens. Now, at face value, a quarter acre isn't all that bad. That's potentially doable, but these same numbers can be applied to commercial scale production, and you can really quickly see how these numbers become astronomical when you're looking at inputs. So the big question here, and this is where the vegetarian point of view really comes into play, is that's a lot of land to grow grain crops, to feed chickens, to make chickens into food, whether that's eggs or meat. And in full confinement, I would have to agree with that. To grow that for an animal that has a long relationship with us throughout history as essentially working with us, taking it out of its sort of niche environment, putting it indoors, and bringing all of its food to it, you can see the tax that puts on the food system. But that being said, there's very little most of us can really do to dramatically change existing systems. But what we can do, because a lot of us do grow our own birds, we have chickens, we are growing food, we can reevaluate based on this how we might be able to reduce our footprint further, and that would put us closer to being sustainable, closer to closing loops, because a quarter acre is potentially achievable, but the first step is looking at that pelleted diet. Most of us feed it out of convenience. But if food becomes scarce, feed prices are going to go up. They already have. In some cases, in some areas, they've even doubled. There's the first piece of the puzzle to potentially look at some alternatives. This is a hard thing to quantify because it's very specific to your farm, your homestead, your growing area, your growing season, etc. But for us, can't forage during the winter. When there's a lot of snow on the ground, there's no way that they can go out and forage for a lot of their food. So we are stuck for a portion of the year, which can be anywhere between 4 and 6 months, depending on the winter. We are stuck bringing them food. Now, on the flip side, there is a time of plenty when the chickens are capable of foraging for a portion of their own food. Just looking at this for a moment, if you could reduce that amount of feed input that needs to be brought onto to the homestead, and just, I'm going to extrapolate it to the year because it's just simpler to do that, but if you could reduce it by 50%, that's a significant reduction in the amount of grain crops that you would need. Now, I'm not suggesting that people should look at this as a means to not feed the chickens. That's quite the opposite. What I'm meaning by this is when you start doing things on a small scale, you have opportunities that, though they may take more time, i.e. they're not as convenient as the pelleted food, they can exponentially reduce your footprint, or your chicken's footprint in this case, as far as producing you food. Because most of us can probably agree, eggs are definitely a beneficial food item that chickens or other birds can produce for us. We would also agree that chicken meat is a useful part of your diet if you have chickens, because like anything, if you have a population, you're going to have population expansion, and like we just said, when winter is a lean time, you're going to need population contraction as well. Hopefully this is some food for thought, or thought for food, or thought for chickens as it were, because I think we're to a point in society, however you want to put that, we're at a point in time where we really have to think about this stuff. Because if we are trying to grow food for ourselves, we're usually doing that to be less dependent. Well, to be less dependent also means that we need to be more sustainable, because, for example, with this chicken math, the real chicken math, you can't necessarily be reliant on the pelleted feeds, because that's still feeding into the system that is directly competing with maybe not the direct kinds of corn and soy, but the land to grow those things is directly competing with us as a species for food. Next time you go out to feed the chickens, give some of this chicken math a bit of a thought, because in a lot of homesteading paradigms, we would love to look at the brighter, shinier side of things, where the chicken math is more about growth of our chicken flocks. But the reality is, the chicken math is, how do we make it sustainable? How do we make it avoid competing with us for food? And we will talk about that in some upcoming videos. I think we have talked a little bit about it in the past, at least our opinions on how this can be made a reality on your homestead. Again, not an exhaustive walkthrough of a solution, but at least it's something to think about, because if you're not consciously aware of your chicken's footprint in the world, it's all too easy to justify it without thinking of the bigger consequences. Because unfortunately, as humans and as consumers, every action we have has some effect somewhere. And when our chicken flocks get too big, or beyond what we need to support ourselves, or what our land can support to help us reduce purchase feed, I'm not even saying eliminate, I'm just saying reduced, we can get into some problems where essentially we don't break any dependency ties, because we're still dependent on this system, and we're still intimately linked with the food supply chain. Because if the human food supply chain prices are going up, food's getting scarce, it's doing the same thing in the chicken world for the same reasons. Stay tuned for more, because we're going to, we may visit some other species, but we're definitely going to look into solving this dilemma, this chicken dilemma, in some upcoming videos.